It's a bit like Shakespeare would say that our destiny is not to be held in the stars, but in ourselves. You take your destiny in your own hands. To me, the worst thing would be just to carry on that track simply because it's a stable track.
I have a small request for you. Do you know that of all the people who watch our episodes, 89% of them haven't subscribed to the channel? I invite you to hit that subscribe button because with a larger audience, I will be able to bring to you even more bigger and influential speakers, providing you with even greater value. So please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and let's start today's episode. Can you take a moment to introduce yourself to our listeners and tell us about who you are and what you do?
I'm Yann Cramer. I'm Professor of Maven Practice at ESSEC Business School, where I teach entrepreneurship and innovation. This is my third life. I had a first one in a large multinational corporation in the energy sector, and then I had a second life in the startup world. So that's teaching is my third.
Okay, and could you provide me with a brief overview of what experiences did you have both in your corporate and startup environments? Like what role did you take and a little bit about your overall journey?
I'm not going to give you the CV talk. In the large corporation, I have very often found myself attracted and landing jobs that were in the realm of new. So new technology, new product development, new product launch, new business development, sometimes new business models to be introduced. I was in the B2B sector only, and always working on the business side, more or less directly at the front end with the customers. Sometimes directly with the customers, other times a bit more a bit more backstage, but always on that newness, if you want. And at some point, I realized that all this thing about new was telling me something about myself. I was actually good at the creativity and the execution, and I had a kind of a reckoning moment when I realized that this was the equation of innovation. And so I decided to recast myself as a guru of innovation, speaking at conferences so doing quite a few things outside of the company's remit. When the opportunity arose to take the B2B business and revamp the way it was doing innovation, I was the guru, and so I did it. So I was director of innovation of that business for quite a few years. In the latter part of that assignment as director of innovation, up to that point, the startups and corporate had operated in two separate universes, if you want. But there was a crack in the multiverse, and the two started to discover each other and talk to each other and collaborate. And so I took the opportunity to take innovation to the next level by having startups work on our program, and that was, at least on a significant scale, my first contact with startups. And I realized that these guys were thinking very differently from the way I was thinking, and that intrigued me, fascinated me to some extent. I researched it, and at some point I decided that that's what I wanted to do next. So I left a large corporation. I went to the world of startups. First as a non-exec, either as a board member or occasionally a business angel, mentor of entrepreneurs. So all non-exec positions, and on three successive occasions, founder of a startup. It happens again 3 times, but the founder asked me whether I was prepared to join as a executive, essentially being the number 2 in the company next to the founder, because the pattern was always the same.
And just to confirm, you were in Shell, right? Like in the energy.
Yeah, the large corporation. Yeah.
Yeah, and you were there for it's pretty well-known corporation, and you were there for 20 years. So
yeah.
When you left it, didn't you have a thought in the back of your mind that I might fail? Because at that point in time, I'm assuming that you had a pretty stable and a pretty good source of income to support yourself. A lot of people are kind of risk averse in that situation, but you kind of took risk and moved to a different sector. So what encouraged you to do that?
Pretty much the fact that it's better to have 2 lives than one, and as long as you you're doing something and you feel that you're learning, you're growing, you really jump out of bed in the morning, then you can continue to do it. If at some point you feel that there is something that's better that you would try, then it's worth doing. It's a bit like Shakespeare would say that our destiny is not to be held in the stars but in ourselves. You take your destiny in your own hands. To me, the worst thing would be just to carry on that track simply because it's a stable track.
When you were working, say, both in like corporate sector and the startup ecosystem, what were the major differences that you felt?
One of them is how they look at means and objectives. One of the great characteristics of early stage startups that has been researched almost on an anthropological level is that startup founders in the early stages are really good at taking their means and maximizing the effect of those means, changing goal if that's what it takes. And this is something that is very foreign to corporate thinking, where we set a goal, we set an objective, and then we find out what are the means that we need to assemble in order to reach that objective, and we are measured, assessed we are assessed on to which extent we reach the objective, not to which extent we maximize the effect of the means that we have. So that's a really big difference. And to be frank, that's the one that first struck me as the key difference when I said earlier that the startup founders were thinking differently from me. That's because I was coming from that corporate environment, and they were maximizing the effect of their means. Another one which I've discovered is the relation to the value proposition. You are in a corporation with a mature business. Your value proposition is there. It would be a mistake not to regularly question it and revisit it. But it is there, and so you can find some comfort in having that foundation layer that sustains your business, and you have your repeat customers, so things are rolling. For the early stage startup, the really founding stage and the first few months and years sometimes of the startup, you have to create that value proposition. It's not there for you. And therefore, the entrepreneur has to be a lot more laser focused on that question of what is the value that I create for the customer. Cannot take for granted any kind of thing that's been done in the past, because there was no past as far as the startup is concerned. But that's also a really big difference, that to say it in different ways, sometimes it's easy for the large corporation to consider the value proposition to be a little bit implicit. It is totally impossible for the startup to have it implicit.
Okay, and like, what do you mean by having it implicit?
And that you don't necessarily have to articulate it all the time to your customer.
Okay.
Because the customer has been buying from you in the past, and they're going to continue buy from you. Yes. So again, like I said, it would be a mistake to ignore the topic altogether, because at some point you might find yourself outpaced by the competition or disrupted by a new entrant. So you want to keep an eye on that very proposition, but you don't have to remind every day the customers what it is. While as a startup founder, it's not about reminding the customers, but it's really about having those explicit discussions with the customers about where the value is and how you can unlock that value for them.
Okay, it kind of reminds me of one of the things I think I read somewhere, one of my friends told me. It was that people, or basically CEOs of really large corporations, should be kind of a bit boring people. They shouldn't be people who are more like inventors, but people who can manage and execute well. Because say if you talk about the Coca-Cola company, everybody knows like Pepsi, the Coke, etc. But if the CEO tries to become entrepreneurial and he says, okay, I want to change the whole Coca-Cola formula, that would be kind of destructive for him because it's something that's already working for him. So in such a huge company, it's kind of like doing entrepreneurship or pursuing something above what you usually have can be sometimes destructive as well. So there are a lot of factors where people or even like companies, say Snapchat, try to incorporate AI into their model, and people or even the customers found it very bad experience, and they were just doing it to kind of stay in the trend and not go out of that.
Well, there's something I buy in what you say and something I don't buy.
Okay.
So the what I buy is that very often the customer of a large corporation expects that when the suppliers, the corporation, brings something to the customer, it's going to work. As a matter of fact, this is one of the reasons why large corporations collaborate with startups, so that they can take the startup along, visit a customer, and when they've done normal business, they can say to the customer, "Hey, there is this guy, very early stage, work in progress, something very new, but you might want to try what they're doing." And they found that the client is a lot more forgiving of something that doesn't work completely if it comes from the startup, and if it comes from the large corporation. So, yeah, if you want to change the formula, you might have to do it on some occasions, but you've got to make sure that it does work when you actually hit the market with it. So that's a different. So the bit that I don't buy is about the CEO having to be boring and focused on managing and execution. The world is more complex than we need leaders and we need managers, and there are different people. So there are many things that leaders need to bring to the plate. It's not just about doing the right thing, it's also about doing things right. And very often, because there is no superhuman, it's a question of assembling the right team. And the classic example is Steve Jobs had already Tim Cook as his COO at the time, and Tim was the boring guy, making sure that things work perfectly well, clockwork, and Jobs needed Cook to be with him, and at some point, for reasons that we know, Cook becomes the CEO. He's not a bad CEO for better or worse than Jobs. He's also leading Apple very well. And although I don't know exactly who is on his executive committee, I've got no doubt that he's assembled the talent based on what he himself brings to the plate and what others have to bring.
Is it advisable for everyone to experience like the startup environment once in a lifetime, according to you, or do you believe that these two environments are suited for different type of people?
It really is a question of what they want to try in their lives, and there is no guarantee to success, either in the corporate world or in startups or in anything. So it's a matter of what they want to try, what they feel that they have the energy to invest into. And also looking at what is the opportunity cost of making one choice versus another. Staying on the path simply because this is a stable path, to me, it is a sure way to have some regrets later. And so the advice would be to really consider at any point in time, what are the other options? If, having looked honestly at the other options, you decide that the path you're on is still the best for you, then so be it. But if it is not, then you can change your track.
And what do you think are like some common pitfalls that entrepreneurs usually fall in when they are kind of in the early stages of their business?
The first one that comes to mind is the delusion that because you've got a piece of technology, you have a value proposition, and that's why we hear very often some magic words being dropped, like connected or Web3 or blockchain, AI, generative AI. The magic words change over time, but there might be that delusion that because we are working on the newest tech, automatically we do have a value proposition. And I'm not making short of tech. It can be a really fantastic means to an end. But just simply thinking that because we said the magic word, we have a value proposition is a fairly common pitfall. Another one that I'm very passionate about is the delusion that raising funds is a measure of success for the startup. Mm-hmm. It is, in some cases, a means to an end. It's not appropriate for all startups to raise funds. It's not appropriate when they raise funds. It's not appropriate for startups to always go to one type of investor versus another. But in any case, whenever they do fundraising, that is not a measure of success. It's an indication that somebody is prepared to take a bet on them. And the measure of success is going to be in sustainably creating value for their customers and being able to extract some of that value in order to be profitable and therefore eventually self-sustaining. So that's also a big delusion. And then perhaps the third is the one around time. Entrepreneurs, because they are optimistic and they need to be, very often have that feeling that the first order or the next big order or something is just a matter of days, and sometimes a matter of days can be like 365. Acquiring customers takes time, especially in B2B, but in B2C, it's not necessarily that acquiring one customer takes a lot of time, but acquiring a mass of customers that you need in B2C in order to be financially successful in your business is what's going to take a lot of time. So that's the third pitfall in which entrepreneurs can easily fall.
Okay, just to summarize, first one was that a lot of entrepreneurs feel they have like the right technology, and that is why customers would buy their product just because they have some fancy technology like AI, Web3, etc. Second, to talk about fundraising, that people usually kind of connect fundraising as a measure of success. The more funds you have or the more funds you raise, the higher your valuation is, the more successful you are. And the third, how much time it takes for you to acquire the customers. What do you think is the right time for a startup to raise funds?
I'm sure that you anticipate the answer that there is no right time. SaaS entrepreneurial projects are so vastly different that there can't be a unique answer to that question. So nonetheless, there are some considerations or questions that we can ask ourselves. If you have to raise funds, which is an if, or at least if you have to raise funds with investors that take equity in your company, you might want to do that as late as possible. At least for one reason, that the more you've been able to demonstrate your product market fit and get traction and improve your metrics and de-risk the business, the better deal you're going to have at the time you raise funds. In some cases, where it might be a matter of the first one to occupy the field is the one that's gonna win, there might be an incentive to raise funds earlier than rather than later. My point is that those cases are not as common as one might think. And the general case is more the one whereby it would make sense to bootstrap as much as you can, which does not stop you from acquiring funds from other ways than investors taking equity in your company. There is some subsidy. There are some subsidies available. You can do crowdfunding. You can have a lot of money. You can sometimes find some typology of business angels that are not thinking like VCs, that are more interesting in the project in the long run, and are prepared to be kind of evergreen, if you want. So there are different ways that you can do it, and if you manage to leverage these ways, you can go on many occasions far enough that when you eventually have to raise funds, if you do have to raise funds, you do that in good conditions. I don't remember the exact number of years, but from memory, Shopify, that everybody knows in that business, raised funds after 10 or 11 years. And they were already a profitable company by then. They raised funds because they had identified a need to have that capital in order to get one significant level up in their operations. So it was legitimate to do that at that point in time for them, and but they didn't feel compelled to raise seed at Series A, at Series B, and so on and so forth, going through the entire ladder.
Okay, and when like these startups fail, sometimes you have to raise like a lot of money, investors' money to get to the point where you are, and after that you fail. And the thing is that if we talk about investors, it's like a connected network. So a lot of entrepreneurs are worried that once they fail, they might not get additional funding when they start a new venture. So what you can do as an entrepreneur, right, that even if you fail, you can still kind of maybe go back and raise money from those investors or people in that circle.
I can see how people might fear that having made investors lose their money, they're going to be blacklisted.
Exactly.
But in fact, when you look at the stats and the feedback from investors, they tend to prefer to invest money in people who have already done entrepreneurship and sometimes with success, but also sometimes with failure. So it's more a question of the attitude. If you burn your investors' money by lying to them, yeah, of course that's going to be a problem. If they identify that or if they assess that you are not coachable, that you don't listen, and that the reason why you're failing is that because your ego is so big that you won't take any advice from anybody, and therefore you make some mistakes and you're not able to recognize them in time. That is the kind of thing that's going to be a problem. So it's not having lost the money per se that's going to be the problem. It's essentially the reason why you lost the money. And if you lost the money, so to speak, with good reasons, that doesn't stop you from being able to raise money in the future again. If you lost the money because you lied to your investors, and so there are some cases in the news right now in the US with some people being in jail. So that is when it becomes a problem.
Okay, and so like name a few, what are, say, key attributes of an excellent entrepreneur?
If I try to be selective, I think optimism has to be one, and particularly the ability to have contagious optimism, to create momentum around your idea, to bring people into a coalition. Again, not to the point that you actually lie to people about what you know and the state of the technology and so on and so forth. But you have to have that ability to project optimism. What I've seen also in entrepreneurs is very high tolerance to ambiguity. In larger corporations that have a leadership development program, tolerance to ambiguity is one quality that they try to foster in the leaders, because at the same time you've got to provide a sense of direction and some clarity to the teams that are working for you. But on the other side of the equation, you know that the world is not, it can't be put into equations, and that is, it's far from simple. So you have that tension between dealing with the complexity of the world and bringing clarity, simplicity to the teams that are working for you. And in order to do that, you've got to have some form of tolerance to ambiguity. Well, because there is an inherent contradiction between recognizing the complexity of the world and bringing simplicity and clarity to your teams. And if you are in a position where you've got to do both, and you've got to deal with that contradiction, and you've got to accept the fact that you don't always have the answers, and yet you've got to provide a sense of direction and to guide your teams. So that is creating for yourself ambiguity, and you've got to be reasonably comfortable with that ambiguity. The third one that I would like to highlight is they are doers. They start, they get going, and they know that they don't have all the means, financial, etc., but also that they don't know everything. Mm. They know that they're going to have to learn a heck of a lot on the journey, and yet it doesn't stop them from starting. They don't say, I'll start when I have acquired all this knowledge that I'm currently lacking. They start now with the knowledge that they have, with what they can do, and they are honest enough with themselves about what they need to learn to actually actively do it along the way. So that's also a big characteristic.
Okay, so they treat the process as a learning journey instead of saying that, okay, I'll learn everything and then I'll get down to the business.
Exactly.
And what do you think are like some resources such as books or podcasts that you would recommend?
One that I read recently, which I found was really good, Sahil Lavinja, I think, is the entrepreneur, and he's and the author of the book that's called the Minimalist Entrepreneur. Mm. And I find that quite refreshing and interesting to especially to take a step back from that culture of we need to raise as much funds as possible, and be more focused on the community that you want to serve, and for which you can make yourself useful. And eventually, once you've established yourself as a contributor in that community, you are able to spot what are the problems, the anomalies, the opportunity, and turn them into opportunities to start your business, and you take it from there, and you grow on the way, and you learn on the way, and eventually you establish a profitable business that perhaps is not hyper growth, but still brings some decent growth both to the business and to yourself.
Thank you very much for being here today. It was amazing having you. Thank you for accepting my invitation. It was a really great conversation.
Yeah. It was a pleasure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening till the end. If you feel inspired and motivated, then share this episode with your friends and family. Together, let's empower others to chase their entrepreneurial dreams and create a ripple effect of success. Remember, greatness is achieved when knowledge is shared.